Hey everyone, just wanted to create a video for you so we can have just one concise video that all students can go to hear in one place, right, instead of spread out amongst multiple videos with questions going on that might distract your attention. But just one video from me where you can hear all of the math strategies for the ACT that I teach and that I've had a lot of success with over the last 10 plus years with hundreds of different students. Again, not to brag, but all the students who I work with, 99% of the students that I work with score in the top 3 to 1% in the country on this test overall. So, this particular YouTube channel is focused on just the math section of the ACT, but there are a lot of strategies that I also teach that go beyond math. But for today, this video really is just wanted to make something personal for my listeners, for my viewers. So the first thing that I always start off with is simplify, right? So on the ACT, if you're watching this video and have never taken a practice exam, I definitely suggest that you do that really before jumping into a lot of study, just because when you do it, it kind of gives you a good sense of, not only what you know or don't know mathematically, but also like I am really big on emotion and psychology, right? So these tests really stretch your emotional capacity as well as your psychological capacity because of the parameters of time added to the parameters of your intellectual ability, right? So what do I mean by that? I mean that for every person who's watching this video, for every person who takes the exam, there will be some questions that you know how to do immediately. There will be some questions that you kind of remember how to do, seems familiar, looks like something you've done in school before. There's some level of familiarity. And then there will be questions that you just have zero idea, right? So all those questions are mixed in and you have this clock that just keeps on ticking the whole time. And it's really easy for students to kind of get stuck in this roller coaster wave of okay, when I know what I'm doing, I'm at a high. When I'm not so sure, I'm kind of in the middle there. I'm not sure if I'm sinking or if I'm rising. And then definitely in those moments, especially later down in the test, as we get closer to the end of the test and the questions get much more complicated, it's like I'm really at a low. And what I have found that is if the longer you stay in that low psychologically, it can actually impact your ability to answer questions that you do know how to answer, right? So let me say that again. If we can manage our emotion, I believe you will get more questions right, because the mismanagement of emotion, right, which is just higher levels of anxiety, higher, a greater sense of pressure, especially when you see a question that you don't know how to answer. I mean, that experience has a halo effect of sorts in ways that actually negatively impact you with questions that you do know how to answer. The way that this usually materializes for students that I work with is we'll be going over a test that a student completed. I'll see a question that the student missed. We'll talk about it. It'll be very obvious the student had no idea what they were doing. And then literally the next 1 to 3 questions after that, the student will also miss, but for those questions, they actually did know how to answer the question, right? So it's I try to explain to them in that moment. It's oh, well, that first question that you missed, that question just made you miss another 2 to 3 questions, right? So there's a lot of ways to deal with that, but the quick, easy, dry way that I can express really quickly by video is no single question is worth you losing a lot of time over, right? So what I like to tell students is if you don't immediately know how to answer the question, then you should think about, is there a strategy that I may be able to use that's in my tool set of strategies, which we'll go over today, that maybe applies to this question? If both of those are no, no, I don't know how to answer it on my own, no, I can't think of a strategy that goes along with it, move on, right? Like literally wash it from your head, because otherwise that question, the longer you try to like grind it out and try to figure it out and do it multiple times and erase your work and start all over again and still continue to get wrong answers, all of that does usually have an impact on future questions. All right, so the very first strategy is to simplify. So the simplify strategy is very useful. I like to start with it first because it's a strategy that helps you to easily identify questions that require simplification. These questions are typically 1 to 3 lines long. That's the first hint, right? So when you open up the ACT math section, what I am saying is that 99% of questions that are 1 to 3 lines long will require that you simplify. So what am I asking you to do? What's the actual strategy? The strategy is to think simplify before you think solve. So when you see this short question, right, and you see an expression or you see an equation in the question, think to yourself, how do I simplify this question? Can I distribute? Can I use a distributive property? Can I simplify an exponent? Can I combine like terms, right? So can I like isolate x perhaps? I want to do everything that I can through simplification before I think about like, oh, what are my answer choices and how do I solve, right? So that's a simplify strategy. The next strategy is plug in answers. So I'd like to go to that strategy next because a lot of times plug in answers and simplify actually go hand in hand. So the way that we know, or the way that you would know, that you can use the strategy of plugging in the actual answer choices is when the question that you're reading mentions a single variable or is asking you to find the value, the quantitative value of a single variable, and all of the answer choices are numbers, right? So if the question, for instance, is asking you to figure out what x is, you have an expression there. Let's just say you don't know how to simplify it, or you may think it's going to take too long to simplify it, and then all of the answer choices represent that x. All you need to do is take those numbers from the answer choices, plug them in to the expression, and then solve the expression based upon what you've plugged in. And if you get a correct answer, that answer choice that you plugged in must be the correct answer. So third on our list is plug in your own number. So this strategy is probably the most powerful strategy for questions that tend to have students respond to with like, I'm not sure, I don't know how to answer type of response. So these questions seem very abstract, and you can tell that they're abstract really as a signal of how to even know that you need to use the strategy of plugging your own you're plugging your own number is when you have variables, either single variable or multiple variables in the question, but then also in the answer choices. And that's the most important thing, right? Because most answer choices on the math section will just be numbers. So when you see X or Y or both X and Y or A, B, right, the variables that this test likes to use, and you see those in the answer choices as well as in the question, you can use the strategy of plugging in your own number. So what do I mean by that? So there are some samples here on the channel that you can definitely find, but just in words, I would describe this as you identify the variables that are in the question and answers. You make up your own number for that variable or multiple variables, right? Choose a small number for those variables. Never choose -1, 0, or 1 because those have weird properties. So I like to choose 2. If there's multiple numbers, I like to choose 2 and 3. I'd like to keep things small, keep them simple. And then plug the number that you chose into the expression in the question, right? When you do that, you will get a numeric answer. You will get a value, okay? Now, that value that you get by plugging in your chosen number, right? Plug in your own number. That value that you get by plugging that number into the question is now the number that you're seeking to match the correct answer choice with. So how does that work? You take those exact same numbers, right? If there are multiple variables, if there's a single variable, you take that exact same number that you had plugged into the question expression, and you plug those numbers into each answer choice until you get a value, a solution that matches what you got in the question, right? So if I were to say x is equal to 2, and let's just say something very simple, like the question said x plus 4, I would say, okay, well, that means if the question is asking what x plus 4 is, and I have x is equal to 2, then when I plug that in, I get a solution from the question of 6. Now, when I go to the answer choices, if I see an answer choice that says like 3x, when I plug 2 in there, I also get 6. So that would be a situation where the 6 that I got from the answer choice matches the 6 that I got from plugging 2 into the question, and therefore that answer choice is the right answer. One caveat to that strategy is you definitely need to try all of the answer choices, because on a rare case, like on occasion, you will get multiple correct answers. The only thing you do whenever you get multiple correct answers, right? So first of all, cross out incorrect answers. But anytime you get multiple correct answers, what I'd like you to do is just change your number. So if you chose x equals 2, cross out anything that was incorrect, and now try x equals 3 and try again, right? You may even want to try x is a negative number if you find that 2 and 3 both work, okay? So that's plug in your own number. Love that strategy. So the next strategy is plug in picture. So this strategy I also love. You probably can tell I love all these strategies. I've used them for so long, and a lot of times my students are just like, they feel a little bombarded by all the different strategies that I have. But I promise you, memorizing the name of the strategy is not as important as being able to identify that there are certain types of questions on the math test, right? It's not just a jumble of randomness. There are certain types of questions, and the more you familiarize yourself with what those types of questions are, and you also have a plan for how to approach every type, the better you'll do on the test. So the next type of question is plug in picture. So just like the name of the strategy says, if the question describes anything that can be drawn, I want you to draw it. So we've seen questions that may describe a triangle, describe a circle, describe a graph, right? It'll say in the XY coordinate plane, it'll give you some coordinate points, right? But then the question itself will not provide the actual visual to go along with what it's describing. In all of those cases, I want you to draw it yourself as neatly as you can, right? It does not have to be perfect, but it will save time if you make it as neat as you possibly can. And then you label that diagram that you've drawn with any of the information provided in the question, and then also any information that you may know, right? So like, for instance, we know that the sum of the 3 angles in a triangle is 180 degrees. So if a question says we have an isosceles triangle and the vertex angle is whatever it may be, 35 degrees. I'm going to label that, and then based upon my understanding of isosceles triangles, that should help me to understand what the other angles are. If it gives me a side length, that should also help me to know whether I have another side length that's equivalent to what they gave me. And then I can use that information along also, especially with plug-in picture, there's a high possibility of using formulas that you've memorized, like area or perimeter, things like that, to put together information that the question may not give you directly, but that you can then implement based upon you now have this picture in front of you instead of just trying to keep all the numbers in your mind. All right. So very simply, if the question describes something that can be drawn, please draw it. So the next type of, or the next strategy, the next type of question are diagram questions. So diagram questions are just like plug-in picture questions, except the question does give you the visual, right? So the question does provide the graph. It does provide the square, the triangle, the rectangle, the cylinder, right? So start thinking of the types of shapes that you've seen, the hexagon, the parallelogram, right? Think of shapes that you've seen on this test. So again, in those instances, I like to tell students, don't try to solve the question immediately. And really that is like an overarching strategy for the entire test. Don't try to solve the question immediately. What you want to do is you want to understand the question as much as you can before you jump to trying to solve it. So how does that kind of present itself in a diagram question? So just like plug-in picture, anytime I see a diagram on any of these tests that I do, I'm labeling the diagram with any information that the question gives me. I am labeling it with anything I can figure out, right? So I know a square has 4 90-degree angles. I know the 3 angles of a triangle add up to 180 degrees. I know the area of a circle, right? There's all these things that I know once I have a shape. I know how to find the slope of a line if I'm given 2 points on a graph. Right? There's a lot of things that I know once I have a picture drawn that the question doesn't necessarily have to tell me. And I just want to make sure, obviously, that whatever it is that I'm taking time with filling into the diagram is actually relevant to what my question's asking for. But I'm not immediately looking at answer choices. I'm looking at, I need to fully understand what the question is saying. And then once I have that understanding and I understand what the question is asking for, I just start filling things in. So I may not be able to fill in or find the exact solution immediately. This happens a lot with questions that are asking for the measurement of an angle, right? So within a large diagram, I may not know that angle outright, but if I start filling in the angles that I do know within the diagram, then my mind starts to turn. It's like, oh, okay, well, yeah, those are vertical angles. Those are supplementary angles. Those are complementary angles. Those are same side interior angles. Those are alternate interior angles, right? Like it allows me to start kind of piecing together like a puzzle of sorts, all the things that I do know, and I'll eventually find my way towards what the question's asking for. So the next strategy and question types, again, the strategies relate to types of questions that you will see, and we just have 2 more left. So this next one is graph, right? So a graph really is a subset of the last 2 strategies, either plug-in picture or diagram, right? Because either you will be drawing your own graph or the question will be providing a graph. But I like to separate it out when I work with students because there's a special strategy that you can use specific to graphs, right? So anytime I see a graph question where I'm given an ordered pair, I look at those ordered pairs as X and Y values, right? So let's think about that again. If I have a graph that I'm drawing or is already drawn for me, and let's say, for instance, for example, that the question says on this graph, you have the point 3, 7. Well, that means when X equals 3, Y must equal 7. So if my answer choices, for instance, represent equations that describe the graph in question, then I can use that X equals 3 and Y equals 7 as numbers to be plugged in to the equation. So a lot of people take a lot of time trying to figure out slope-intercept form, and that's fine. If you're really good at that and fast at that, then please do that. But again, strategies are for when you don't know what to do or when what you do know what to do is taking too long, right? So if you see a graph question and you're not certain of what to do, what I'm saying is one good strategy to consider is that all the points on the graph, right? So any ordered pair on that graph becomes fair game as an X and Y value to plug into an equation in order to figure out which equation actually simplifies the graph for you. Okay, so last but not least, really is it's not my favorite strategy. It's really more of a process because every question will be a little bit different, but They are easily recognizable. This is translate word problems. So the ACT has plenty of word problems. It also has plenty of simplified questions, right? Again, those 1 to 3 line long questions, plenty of diagram questions. A lot of times what we'll see is word problems along with diagram questions. So there's a lot of crossover and carryover there. But the idea with translate word problem, right? So the reason why I have that as a strategy and also as a question type is because a lot of students get confused by just reading the entire word problem all the way through and then not feeling like they fully understood what was said, and then they immediately jump to trying to answer the question with like limited understanding, right? And that's just a recipe for confusion and just like that building anxiety, that building sense of pressure, that building sense of I don't know how to answer this question. So what I always tell students is when it comes to a word problem, you never want to read it straight through. You want to read one sentence at a time and stop at the end of that sentence, especially if there's quantitative information provided in the sentence, to make sure, one, that you understood what that sentence said, and two, that you write down the quantitative information, right? So here's the translation part, right? So as I'm reading and stopping in between each sentence, if there's a quantitative bit of information, I'm going to write that down under the question, right, as a little shorthand note to reflect or represent that sentence. The idea being that if I do that for every sentence and I make sure that I'm writing down all the quantitative information as I go, and also if there happens to be like linked information, what I mean by linked information is like something that I write down from, let's say, sentence 2 has an impact on what I read and write down from sentence 3, and therefore I can now find some new information that the question did not directly give me, but makes sense when I put those two bits of information together from those two sentences. I'm like giving my mind a chance to digest the information and fully understand the question before I start looking at answer choices. And second of all, because there's so many words there, it gives the test writer an opportunity to confuse us. So by breaking it down sentence by sentence and then having this translatable or this translation on the side, if I do it the right way, don't need to continue to reread that seemingly confusing paragraph or question, and instead I can just reference what I wrote down as a translation of the question in order to answer the question. Okay, so again, that strategy is important because it gives you like a process on how to digest a lot of information without like overloading your mind, but also it's hard in this format, at least, to express and explain how to answer all questions that fall under that category. Again, I have plenty of questions here on the YouTube channel that are in that category. So if you're watching some of those videos, you will definitely hear me say, okay, this is a TWP or this is a translate word problem question. Typically, these questions are between like 4 or more lines long, 3, 4 or more lines long. That's how you would be able to identify them. But again, the process is important because it just slows you down a little bit and lets you like take in that information and digest it, translate it into something in a way that you understand it in shorthand, and then answer the question from there. So I hope this video has been helpful. Please like it if it is. If you have any comments, please do send me a note here, and I'll make sure to get to you with any questions you may have. I am very excited to start putting up some more videos. I think we have about 120 or so videos up right now of some previous ACT math tests, and I need to update the channel with some new questions. So if you have any requests, by all means also reach out to me. If you have any questions that you're as you're studying and preparing for your exam that you're just not really sure how to answer, shoot those to me, and I will definitely do my best to put together a video. More importantly, not just like how to solve it, but also how all the videos are, like how to think about it, right? Through the context of the strategies that I just mentioned. All right, peace. Thank you so much for paying attention, and see you soon.